No. Okay. Here we go. Let's say we have the cosine of x equals 3/5. The cosine of x equals 3/5, and we're in quadrant 4. Okay? What's the sine of x going to equal? What's the tangent of x going to equal? What's the secant of x going to equal? What's the cosecant of x going to equal? And what's the cotangent of x going to equal? Okay. All right. We got a 5/3 for secant right off the bat because it's just reciprocal. Okay, so we can do that. Next one to find is the, if I have cosine, what's my Pythagorean identity with cosine? Sine. I know that sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x equals 1. So sine squared of x plus 3/5 squared equals 1. What's 3/5 squared? 9/25. So I'm going to subtract 9/25 from each side. 1 is the same as 25/25. 25/25 minus 9/25 is 16/25. So if we take the square root of each side, x would equal positive or negative 4/5. So since we're in quadrant number 4, sine is what? Positive 4/5 or negative 4/5? Negative 4/5. What's the next one to find? What's the next one to find? Cosecant is negative 5/4. Next one to find. Tangent is sine over cosine, right? Tangent is negative 4/5 over 3/5. So if we multiply top and bottom by 5, what do we get? Negative 4/3. So what is cotangent of x? Negative 3/4. Okay? You guys can kind of remember that from the first section a little bit. Okay? This review is just kind of reminding you a little bit about what we do. Okay? Okay. How many questions are on the quiz? Like 13. Sine of negative x minus sine of x. What's the sine of negative x equal to? So negative sine of x minus sine of x is negative 2 sine of x. We have sine of negative x times cotangent of negative x times secant of negative x. What do we get? What does sine of negative x change into? Negative sine of x. What does cotangent of negative x change into? Negative cotangent of x, which is what over what? Negative cosine of x over sine of x. The negative is out front. It's not in front of both of them. It's just out front. Okay? What is the secant of negative x? Secant of x, which is 1 over cosine of x. Now what do we do? Cancel your sines, cancel your cosines. Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. In front of sine, there's two negatives. Okay? Okay? Do we need to separate you? Do you need to go to the naughty chair up front?
I didn't do anything. What do you mean?
Okay. What do we do when you see that? FOIL. 3 cosine of x times 5 cosine of x is 15 cosine of x, squared of x, actually, 15 cosine squared of x. Outers, 12. Inners, negative 10. What's 12 cosine of x minus 10 cosine of x? 2 cosine of x. Last times last, minus 8. Three secant of x minus 2 quantity squared. Now what do I do? Separate them. Write them twice in FOIL. Thank you very much. That is the correct way to do it. 3 secant of x times 3 secant of x. 9 secant squared of x. Outers is minus 6 secant of x. Inners is minus 6 secant of x. So then we get minus 12 secant of x. Negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. Okay? Five cosine squared of x minus 7 cosine of x minus 6. Factor that. Without crying, factor this. Yeah, you multiply first and last terms, because if there's a first term coefficient on here, you multiply first and last terms, you get negative 30. What are the factors of negative 30? 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. Which one do we use? 3 and 10. So it adds up to negative 7, so we need a negative 10 and a positive 3. So it's 5 and then cosine of x plus 3 and then 5 cosine of x minus 10. You just drop the power on this and you write this thing the same way, but dropping the power as the first term of each. And then these two, we have a plus 3 and a minus 10. So that's how we get that. And now divide by the greatest common factor. What's the greatest common factor of these two? 1. What's the greatest common factor of these two? 5. So you get 5 cosine of x plus 3 and cosine of x minus 2. 9 cosine squared of x minus 25 tangent squared of x. So those each have square roots. So this is differences of squares. Difference of squares factoring. What's the square root of 9 cosine squared? 3 cosine of x. No, not the sign of the middle. They have opposite signs. So there's 1 plus, 1 minus to make a negative 25. And then 5 tangent of x, 5 tangent of x. Okay? Difference of squares factoring. If you wanted to, you could multiply first and last terms again. But what do you notice about the first and last terms? They're perfect squares. So you can take the square root of them. So this is a perfect square trinomial. So it's one set of parentheses squared. Oops. Middle should be 24. Okay. So what's the square root of the first? 4 sine of x. And then, now the sign of the middle term minus square root of the last, 3. And 2 times 4 times 3 is 24, so that works. Okay, what do we do first here? Change this to sines and cosines. Change to sines and cosines. Cosine of x over sine of x times sine of x plus 1 over cosine of x times cosine squared of x equals 2 cosine of x. A cosine and a cosine cancel, a sine and a sine cancel, so we have cosine x plus cosine of x. What would you do first here? Change to sines and cosines, so secant of x becomes 1 over cosine of x over 1 over cosine of x minus cosine of x equals cosecant squared of x. Got a complex fraction now, don't we? How do I get rid of my complex fraction? Multiply by the denominator of the denominator. So I multiply the whole thing down here by the cosine, not just one of them, the whole thing. So I get cosine of x over cosine of x over cosine of x over cosine of x minus cosine squared of x equals cosecant squared of x. What does my numerator become? 1. Denominator. How about 1 minus cosine squared of x? What's 1 minus cosine squared of x equal to? Sine squared of x. And what's 1 over sine squared of x equal to? Cosecant squared of x. Okay, last one that I'm going to teach, and then I'll give you a bunch of time to work on this. Now, we could do this more than one way. I could change these into sines and cosines and go there. You see I have a minus sign here and a plus sign here with no pluses or minuses here or here. So when you see that, you think conjugates. How about we just take care of conjugates right now? Okay? So let's take care of our, before we change this and make it overly too complicated, see how much simpler it's going to be if I don't change it to sines and cosines. I'm just going to multiply this by the conjugate of the denominator, top and bottom. So I'm going to go cosecant of x plus cotangent of x, cosecant of x plus cotangent of x. So I get cosecant of x plus cotangent of x over cosecant squared of x minus cotangent squared of x equals 1 plus cosine of x over sine of x. What's cosecant squared minus cotangent squared equal to? It's equal to 1. It's equal to 1. Now, what can I change cosecant and cotangent into? 1 over sine of x plus cosine of x over sine of x. If I add my fractions, there I be. Ta-da, I'm done. Okay, so I will hand out the practice quiz, and I will also hand out the